Hi there. This is a presentation that I gave at the Cycling Society Symposium at Trinity College Dublin on 7 September 2023. I'm recording this at home in order to give more people an opportunity who might be interested to be able to see it than might have been able to attend the symposium. So I'm recording it at home, and just a heads up, I live with among others, one very energetic cat who wears a bell so that she can't catch birds. And I have re-recorded this so many times, eventually I decided I'll give up and just give a heads up in advance. If you hear ting-a-ling-a-ling in the background, that's my cat. Without further ado then, let's get to the presentation itself. 6 years ago, almost to the day, I reported for duty as a freshly minted postgraduate student. So, if I could go back in time and talk to my past self, what would I say? I'd say, brace yourself. You're not going to get this done in 3 years. Brace yourself. You're about to experience the intense joy of research, and it's addictive. Brace yourself, because sometimes it's going to feel as if you're King Richard IV in Blackadder the First.
Do you want me to be honest or tactful?
Tactful, I think.
Tell him to get stuffed!
I'm not going around telling people to get stuffed, but I've at times really worried my ideas sounded about as insensitive. The tactful version is that I had a hypothesis going in that the roads network is a social system. Road users are a stratified hierarchical order of social groups. Drivers are a dominant social group, and cyclists are a subordinate, deviant minority outgroup. So I applied a social dominance lens to the problem of poor cycling uptake, which of course goes much further than only poor cycling uptake. I'm not going to go into it here, but I encourage you to read up on social dominance theory. There's a lot of lovely information available on it online. The honest version is that I grew up in apartheid South Africa, obviously as a member of the dominant group. And the discourse related to cyclists and cycling here in Ireland and more widely online often left me deeply unsettled, because the tone and patterns just felt the same to me as the discourse that surrounded me through childhood. Now, if I were to go into the struggles I've had with this over the years, the mental struggles over daring to think this way, we'd be here all day, and I'd be making everybody my therapist. But ultimately, I understood it this way. The principle of internal combustion powers rockets that go to the moon, but it also powers my neighbor's little push mower. Social dynamics that have caused historic misery and suffering can also cause smaller scale, less dramatic inequalities. I started with a Barthesian media discourse analysis, which seemed to strongly support my hypothesis. Again, for the sake of time, I'm not going to expand. I recently did a detailed presentation on this aspect of my project for Engineers Ireland. This was recorded, and you can find it online. Now, this type of analysis, though it is disciplined and it has to be fully justifiable and supportable in every conclusion, you cannot get away from the fact that it is a subjective method. So to test my conclusions, I conducted a survey, and I conducted 16 semi-structured interviews. In this presentation, I'll discuss one aspect of the interviews in more detail, testing for the assignation of blame. There are certain patterns in how people assign blame that you should expect to see in a social dominance dynamic, and I could test for those characteristics. My respondents were divided equally between male and female, and they were spread quite evenly across age groups. Early in the interview, I asked them to select only one of the choices shown, and then they were given the opportunity to add, I am also a, and add whatever else they wanted. Some only identified as one, some identified as two or more. In the segment I'm reporting on today, I showed my respondents a series of video clips. Now, after each clip, they saw this screen. Before starting, I walked them through each question they would be asked after each clip. Now, in some of the clips, there's nothing wrong. So if you think this is one of them, then we just move on after the first question. So if they say, yes, I thought the situation was okay, then I just go to the next clip. If you didn't think it was okay, we move to the next question shown. If not, who is to blame for it not being okay? And I would gently insist that they had to choose one person that they blame most for the situation. They could then add more if they wanted. The rest of the questions were designed to prompt discussion and give more insight, but I was most interested in the first two questions. I'm going to show you some of these clips now, and I want you to consider what your answer would have been. There is no audio in these clips, so don't worry about adjusting the volume. And let me play it again for you. So, the majority of my respondents felt the situation was not okay. And of those, the majority blamed the cyclist. Now, certainly with the audience I was addressing at the Cycling Society Symposium, I felt that I probably didn't need to point out that this was one of the clips in which there was nothing wrong. Everyone behaved exactly as they should have. But most of my respondents in my study felt that the cyclist broke a red light. But let's have a closer look at this. When you as a road user get to a traffic light control junction and you want to turn right, unless you get a green arrow, you don't have right of way. Instead, oncoming traffic has right of way. All the road users involved behaved, more or less, exactly as they should have. Blame falling on members of subordinate groups when they have done nothing wrong is consistent with the social dominance dynamic. This can be difficult to watch. Right, so at the conference I only played it once. I'll play it again because we're not restricted with time. Right. The cyclist in this clip largely behaves exactly as they're supposed to. Even if you could find fault in their actions, certainly drivers should hold back when they're following a cyclist on a narrow lane. Most of my respondents seemed to agree, but one respondent actually thought that what they saw in this clip was perfectly fine. Of the 15 who thought it was not fine, 3 actually blamed the cyclist. Secondary blame was placed on one of the other drivers. Blaming members of the subordinate group when they were, in fact, the ones being wronged is again consistent with the social dominance dynamic. The same thing moves the tendency to blame women for being sexually assaulted, for instance. And again, to stress, I understand that these situations are not comparable in their severity and how widespread they are. But what I'm saying is that the mechanisms behind it are the same. So, cyclists were, therefore, often blamed when they did nothing wrong or when they were actually the ones wronged. Now, this one is really interesting, and when I've played the clip, I'll take a moment to walk through what happened here. Let's see. I'll see if I can play it again. There we go. The faster cyclist indicated they were going to turn looking back to make eye contact with the driver of the filming vehicle, because this is the most likely source of harm for them. It's behind you in situations like this. Cyclists are also frequently urged to make eye contact with drivers as a way to keep safe. Unfortunately, this means the faster cyclist misses the slower cyclist, also indicating they're moving to the right. If you have the benefit, as I do, of having watched this about 4,000 times, you see that the rear cyclist actually looks back a moment before the slower cyclist puts their hand up. Now the faster cyclist, certain the filming vehicle was holding back, now looks forward again and starts moving out. At the same time, realizing in that moment, this all happens very quickly, they realize the slower cyclist was also moving right. The faster cyclist couldn't pull on the brakes soon enough because their one hand is still lifted, so they opt to swerve around and overtake the slower cyclist. Now this is probably not great. You shouldn't overtake someone who is in the process of turning. The faster cyclist should ideally have just stayed in the cycle lane, but it's been blocked by a driver. Almost all my respondents thought the situation was not okay. 3 blamed the driver, but most blamed the faster cyclist. I really took time with this clip and in some cases played it for my respondents over and over, pausing where they asked me to. One respondent tried to see if the slower cyclist had rear view mirrors, thinking that was probably the worst offense in this situation. This one is quick, so I'll play it a couple of times. Four of the respondents who blamed the cyclist thought the cyclist was going the wrong way in a one-way street. One thought the cyclist should have waited for traffic to clear before proceeding. One felt the cyclist should have moved to the wrong side of the street to be more visible. I'm going to repeat this now. One of my respondents felt that what the cyclist should have done was to move to the wrong side of the street to be more visible. Another placed blame on the cyclist for, as they perceived it, riding on the wrong side of the street. This is not the first time that I have noticed people judging cyclists for doing exactly what another person would judge them for not doing. It's crazy. You just can't win. So a total of 9 of the 16 respondents either didn't notice or thought nothing of the row of cars illegally parked on the footpath. I'm sorry for that aside. It's just very interesting because there's a very specific exchange from my media analysis that it's just so in line with this. But the point here is that the wrongdoing of the dominant group is just either not noticed or not thought relevant. It gets lost in people's quest to find a way to blame the subordinate. So driver wrongdoing was often not noticed, or it was noticed but not thought to matter. Such a focus on the wrongdoing of the subordinate group, and either unconscious or sometimes knowing blindness to the wrongdoing of the dominant group, that is again consistent with the social dominance dynamic. And what I mean with knowing blindness is that you see it, but it's so normalized that you don't think of it as wrong. So you see, maybe you notice the cars parked on the footpath, but it doesn't occur to you to say something about it because it is just so widespread and accepted. Next clip. Right, again, 9 of my respondents thought this situation was perfectly fine. 7 didn't. Of the 7, 4 blamed the driver and 3 blamed the cyclist. All 3 of those who blamed the cyclist took issue with them not being on the cycle lane. So once that van that had turned into their way had cleared, the cyclist would have had to go up there the way the arrow shows. Then the cycle lane ends almost immediately. It's not clear where you should go. And I know for a fact the cyclist would be lambasted if they crashed into a waiting bus passenger, because I saw exactly that happen around an incident in the social media analysis that I performed. People are often blind to a subpar cycling experience. Right. The 3 respondents who placed blame on a driver felt that the filming vehicle overtook too closely. Those who blamed the cyclist took issue with their position on the road, perceived lack of signalling, and so on. Nobody considered that the infrastructure design here really doesn't serve the cyclist's needs. And I am bearing in mind that the purpose here was to blame a person, but I'm talking about in the discussion following, there was just not really focus on this really isn't ideal for cycling. The subpar experience of the cyclist is widely not even noticed, or it gets lost in the quest to find a way to blame cyclists for their own misfortune. And this is related to internal or external blame allocation. The allocation of blame is highly relevant to the development of infrastructure for people who ride bicycles to get around. Internal allocation of blame, which is the tendency for subordinate groups, looks to the individual or group as the cause of their own misfortune. In Ireland, thousands upon thousands of high visibility vests have been distributed as a solution to the problem of cyclist fatalities on our roads. That's a response that is born from placing the blame internally on the individual concerned. External blame takes a moment to stop finding fault with the victim and examines alternative causes for the problem. An example relevant to cycling is how the Netherlands responded to cyclist fatalities on Dutch roads by completely overhauling their infrastructure. In a social dominance dynamic, the needs of the dominant group will be sacred, and it can help explain the virulent responses that are so routine when a reallocation of space or any allocation of resources is considered in order to provide good infrastructure for cycling. I believe that the general experience that segregated cycling infrastructure tends to lead to better cycling uptake is also consistent with social dominance, because it provides protection from a more powerful group that can, and often does, kill members of the subordinate group. This is the place where usually you discuss solutions. And I'm sorry, but I don't have any. Social dominance theory is bleak and pessimistic. Sedanius and Prato argued that it has never in recorded history been successfully challenged. We do have a chance on our roads because we can shape the environment, but we will need to shape it to protect the vulnerable, not from deliberate malice, but from a dynamic that is as powerful as a river in flood and affects our thoughts and actions whether we like it or not. Being aware that asking people nicely to not speed and to share what everything else around us screams is rightfully theirs, that is not going to work. Thank you so much for listening, and I hope that was informative. You are more than welcome to visit my website, nadiawilliams.eu, for more information on my research, links to my writing, and more information and just where I'm at with this project and other stuff. So thanks again for listening, and I hope to see you soon.